In the crisp autumn of 2024, the sprawling complex of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., glowed under the warm September sun, but a chill hung in the air inside the office of Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson, the first woman to achieve such a rank in the U.S. Army. Her desk, usually piled with reports and directives, held only a single letter, its uneven handwriting betraying urgency and despair. It was from Private James Carter, serving with the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade at Fort Carson, Colorado. The letter exposed a grim reality: soldiers fed moldy soup from expired rations, drinking rusty water from canteens, and equipped with counterfeit helmets that shattered like glass. At the heart of this corruption stood Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes, head of logistics, and Master Sergeant Paul Wilson, warehouse manager, colluding with Eastern Defense Solutions, a shady supplier turning the brigade into their personal fiefdom. Carter's final plea, scrawled faintly, begged for the letter's safe delivery and his own safety. Sarah reread the words, her jaw tightening. The 108th, once a proud unit, had been gutted by budget cuts and reforms, left to rot in a forgotten corner of Colorado, where corruption festered unchecked. Over months, her military inspectorate had received over a dozen anonymous complaints through secure channels, tales of rancid food, faulty gear, and officer brutality. Each time, internal investigations by the brigade returned polished reports claiming no issues or minor misunderstandings, a stone wall of denial. Sarah rose, her three-star epaulets catching the sunlight streaming through her office window overlooking Arlington Heights. Known as the Iron Lady to some, a political general to others, she had clawed her way through a male-dominated world, graduating from West Point in the footsteps of her father, a career soldier. Her stars weren't for show, they were for soldiers like Carter, whose dignity she swore to protect. She pressed the intercom. Colonel Demidov, report. Colonel Stephen Grant, head of the 1st Inspection Division, entered with a crisp salute. The 108th Brigade, Fort Carson. I want all complaints from the last 6 months, their internal investigation reports, and every scrap of data on Eastern Defense Solutions contracts, media mentions, corruption allegations for the past 3 years. You have 1 hour. Grant's eyes flickered but he nodded, exiting without a word. Sarah's nickname was Viper for a reason. Once she latched on, she didn't let go. An hour later, her desk groaned under a stack of files. The complaints were damning consistent accounts of spoiled rations, defective equipment, and abuse, but the brigade's reports were carbon copies: complainant unidentified, insufficient evidence, internal controls strengthened. A cover-up, plain and simple. Eastern Defense Solutions file was worse. 3 years prior, they'd been investigated for supplying substandard body armor to another unit, but the case collapsed when a key witness recanted and evidence vanished. The officer who buried it? Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan, now a top official in the Pentagon's Armaments Directorate. A cartel was forming in the shadows. This isn't just corruption, Sarah muttered. It's organized crime. A standard inspection would yield nothing, the game was rigged. She needed to flip the board. Colonel Grant, I'm taking a day's leave tomorrow. Urgent family matters. No documents for my signature until I return. Grant's surprise was evident, but he knew better than to question her. Sarah's family matters were never ordinary. Before dawn, she traded her uniform for hiking gear, packed a backpack with a voice recorder, camera, and her Inspector General credentials, and climbed into an old Jeep Wrangler. She hit I-95, heading for Fort Carson, her heart heavy. This unauthorized move could end her career. Critics would pounce, branding her a reckless woman unfit for command. But the image of Carter eating moldy soup and soldiers drinking rusty water drove her forward. To turn away would betray the uniform she wore. As she neared Fort Carson, the Rockies' green peaks contrasted with signs of military outposts, a reminder of the region's strategic weight. She parked just shy of the 108th's checkpoint, which looked eerily quiet. Downsizing had left it skeletal. Posing as a middle-aged hiker, Sarah approached, her plan to scout the base and, if possible, slip inside. "Ma'am, Where you headed? A guard asked warily. Oh, I'm with a local hiking club, she said, feigning innocence. Our trail cuts through here. Any chance there's a spring nearby? I'm parched. The guard was firm. Restricted area. Civilians aren't allowed. Turn back. As she played up her plea for water, Master Sergeant Paul Wilson stumbled out, reeking of alcohol. What's this? Some old lady begging for water? This ain't a charity, Grandma. Get lost. His drunken outburst confirmed Carter's letter. Sarah's eyebrow twitched. Please, watch your tone. I haven't done anything wrong. Wilson sneered, demanding her ID and ranting about treason. Then a sleek SUV rolled up, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes stepped out, his face slick with arrogance. What's the noise, Sergeant? Wilson explained, and Hayes dismissed Sarah as a local beggar, ordering her gone. Overhearing their hushed talk about a new batch of fake body armor from Eastern Defense Solutions, Sarah's recorder, hidden in her trekking pole, blinked red. As Hayes drove off and Wilson turned back, Sarah's voice cut through. Master Sergeant Wilson, you just discussed effective body armor with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, referencing a prior incident 3 years ago. Wilson froze, his drunken haze evaporating. Who the hell are you? Sarah pulled her credentials. Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson, head of the Military Inspectorate, Department of Defense. Her badge gleamed 3 stars and the U.S. seal. You're under arrest for negligence, abuse of authority, and potential treason. Wilson's jaw dropped, the guard beside him petrified. The autumn breeze seemed to still as Sarah's presence loomed, a crack forming in their corrupt fortress. Time froze at the checkpoint, Wilson's pupils shaking, the guard wishing he could faint. The hiker was no ordinary woman, she was a legend, now judging them in the flesh. Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson stood resolute in the dusty air of Fort Carson, Colorado, her piercing gaze fixed on Master Sergeant Paul Wilson and the stunned guard at the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade's checkpoint. The weight of her credentials, head of the Military Inspectorate, Department of Defense, hung like a guillotine over the 2 men, their faces drained of color as the reality of her presence sank in. Wilson stammered, his bravado crumbling, but Sarah had no time for his excuses. She activated her military radio, her voice steady and commanding. First section, do you copy? Colonel Stephen Grant's tense voice crackled back, on the line, General. Awaiting orders. Sarah's instructions were precise. Deploy the 2nd Inspection Team by helicopter to the 108th Brigade, Fort Carson, immediately. Full lockdown, secure headquarters and all communication nodes. No calls, no data leaves this base. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Grant replied, and Sarah switched off the radio. Turning to Wilson and the guard, she snapped, you will surrender all communication devices and follow my orders. Any attempt to contact anyone or leave your post will be treated as desertion and disobedience, adding to your charges. Her voice carried a chilling authority, frosting the air around the guardhouse. Wilson, still reeling, and the guard complied, handing over their phones as if in a trance. Sarah's next move was to inspect the brigade herself, starting with the mess hall. She ordered Wilson to lead her to the kitchen, the guard trailing behind, both men moving like condemned prisoners. Word of the commotion at the checkpoint spread like wildfire through the skeletal remains of the 108th, soldiers whispering in fear and awe as Sarah's commanding figure strode across the base. The mess hall was deserted, the stench of rotting food scraps lingering in the air. In the kitchen, a handful of conscript cooks froze as Sarah, still in her hiker disguise, entered with the pale-faced Wilson in tow. What's for dinner? She asked sharply. A nervous cook, barely out of his teens, mumbled, stewed chicken and barley soup, ma'am. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Open the food storage. Wilson hesitated, then unlocked the door. A wave of mold and sour decay hit her nose. The storage room was a nightmare, boxes coated in black mold, puddles of unidentifiable liquid pooling on the floor, onions sprouting green shoots, and potatoes oozing rot. Sarah's voice trembled with barely contained fury. This is what you've been feeding soldiers. The cooks lowered their heads, their silence louder than any confession. Pointing to a freezer, a cook indicated the chicken. Sarah yanked open the door, the stench intensifying. The boxes inside were stamped with expiration dates, December 2023, nearly a year past due. Master Sergeant Wilson, she said, her tone lethal, explain this. Wilson, now white as a sheet, fumbled for words as he retrieved a folder of delivery records. Sarah snatched it, scanning the documents. They claimed fresh, high-quality supplies from Eastern Defense Solutions, every detail meticulously falsified. Perfect paperwork, she said, her sarcasm cutting like a blade, tossing the folder to the floor. Turning to the cooks, she ordered, line up. State your rank and name. They complied, voices trembling, fear and faint hope flickering in their eyes. Sarah's gaze softened briefly as she addressed them. I'm Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson, head of the Military Inspectorate. From this moment, you speak only the truth about what you've seen and heard. I guarantee your safety. Lie or hide anything, and you'll be considered accomplices. A murmur rippled through the cooks. Then, a young private at the end of the line stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. Can you really protect us? Sarah nodded. I swear it. He took a breath, glancing at his comrades, and said, I'm Private James Carter, ma'am. Before he could continue, the mess hall door slammed open, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes stormed in, his face flushed with irritation. Dressed in civilian clothes, he was clearly preparing for his meeting with Eastern Defense Solutions Director, Richard Peterson, at Rocky Ridge Lodge. What the hell's going on here? Who are you? He barked, glaring at Sarah. Wilson, too terrified to speak, stood mute as Hayes rounded on him. Samolov, why's this civilian here? Get her out. Sarah met Hayes' gaze, unflinching. She knew he recognized her. Both had graduated from West Point, though years apart. His eyes widened as the pieces clicked, the legendary cadet, now the Inspector General. Sarah Thompson, he stammered, addressing her by name in panic. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, she said coldly, where are you rushing off to in civvies? Late for your dinner with Peterson? Hayes' pupils dilated, his secret exposed. Before he could respond, the roar of helicopters split the sky. 2 Black Hawks carrying the 2nd Inspection Team descended onto the parade ground, kicking up clouds of dust. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, you're under arrest for theft of military property and abuse of authority. Hayes stood frozen, the helicopter's roar drowning out his thoughts as the inspection team spilled out, folders and evidence kits in hand. Colonel Stephen Grant sprinted to Sarah, saluting, 2nd Inspection Team reporting, General. Full inspection of the 108th Brigade begins now. His voice echoed across the base, amplifying the sense of a military operation unfolding. Sarah issued rapid orders, cordon off the mess hall and kitchen. Seize all food as evidence, especially the expired chicken in the freezer. Handle it carefully. Detain Hayes and Wilson, isolate them completely, confiscate their devices, and assign 2 inspectors to each for round-the-clock surveillance. Hayes tried to protest, this is an abuse of power, General. No formal procedure, but his words were drowned out as inspectors grabbed his arms. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah approached Private James Carter, who stood clutching a small notebook, stunned. Private Carter, she said gently, you're safe now. Hand me that. Trembling, he passed her the notebook, a diary detailing 6 months of corruption, from spoiled deliveries to officer misconduct. Well done, Private, Sarah said, tucking it into her backpack. Your courage made this possible. She turned to Grant, move all cooks, including Carter, to a secure location under guard. Record their statements separately, no pressure or coercion. As the team sprang into action, a jeep screeched up from headquarters. The brigade commander, Colonel Richard Baxter, leapt out, his face a mix of fury and confusion. General Thompson, what the hell is this? An inspection without notifying me? That's a violation of chain of command. Baxter, older than Sarah and a West Point contemporary, had always resented her rise as a woman in the Army. Sarah kicked a crate of moldy potatoes, the rot spilling toward his polished boots. "Colonel, before you lecture me on protocol, explain why your soldiers are eating this garbage. If you didn't know, you're unfit to lead. If you did and stayed silent, you're complicit." Baxter's face purpled, but he had no response. "As of now, I'm assuming command of this base," Sarah declared. "Wait in your office until the inspection is complete." Without waiting for his reply, she turned toward the armory, the next target in Carter's diary. The heavy iron door creaked open, revealing rows of neatly stacked equipment helmets and body armor labeled RS-7 from Eastern Defense Solutions. At first glance, everything seemed orderly, but Sarah wasn't fooled. She grabbed a helmet, raised it, and smashed it against the floor. It cracked with a dull thud, then shattered into pieces like brittle clay after a second blow. The inspectors gasped. "My God," Grant muttered. Sarah pointed to a crate of body armor. An inspector opened one, revealing a pristine vest, but when Sarah sliced open the armor plate compartment, the truth emerged: not bullet-stopping ceramic, but rusty pressed steel, useless in combat. "This is what they're sending soldiers to war with," she said, her voice a mix of rage and betrayal. "Seize everything from Eastern Defense Solutions. Test every piece, down to the last screw. Search Hayes and Wilson's offices and homes, find their books, files, anything tracking money. Leave no stone unturned." The inspection team moved like a well-oiled machine, turning the base upside down. Soldiers watched, torn between fear and hope, as Sarah's team tore through the corruption that had choked their lives. By nightfall, evidence piled up: shadow contracts on Hayes' computer, cash and receipts linked to Peterson in Wilson's apartment. The trail led straight to Eastern Defense Solutions and higher, to Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan. In the brigade commander's office, now a makeshift inspection headquarters, Sarah's phone rang. It was Sullivan himself, his voice tight. "Sarah, where are you?" "Fort Carson, Robert," she replied coolly. "A base you know well." "Stand down," he urged. "You're stirring a hornet's nest. Eastern Defense Solutions has connections to the Pentagon, Capitol Hill. Your career, your life could be at stake." The threat was clear. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing shattered helmets and Carter's pale face. "You buried their case 3 years ago, didn't you?" "I'm a soldier, Robert. My troops' lives matter more than my own. I won't stop." She hung up, staring into the cold Colorado night. The battle was no longer just against Hayes and Wilson, it was against a hidden enemy with tentacles deep in the Pentagon. Pandora's box was open, and Sarah Thompson was ready to fight. The night at Fort Carson, Colorado, was a cold, unyielding shroud over the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade, where Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson stood at the heart of a storm she had unleashed. In the brigade commander's office, now a nerve center for her inspection team, she pored over the avalanche of evidence piling up against Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes, Master Sergeant Paul Wilson, and their shadowy supplier, Eastern Defense Solutions. Files revealed forged invoices, cash trails linked to the company's director, Richard Peterson, and a pattern of silenced complaints that pointed to a deeper rot. Sarah's team worked relentlessly, uploading data to a secure Pentagon server, but her focus was interrupted by a call from Colonel Stephen Grant, his voice grim. "General, we've got a problem. The Pentagon's internal network crashed. All our data on the 108th everything we've uploaded since last night is corrupted. No access." The words hit like a punch. This wasn't a glitch, it was sabotage. The monster, Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan, had warned her about Eastern Defense Solutions backers, with tentacles reaching into the Pentagon's core, had struck. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced calm into her voice. "No panic, Colonel. We have the originals, documents, recordings, physical evidence. Digital loss doesn't erase the truth." Inside, she burned. The enemy's reach into the Pentagon servers meant they were playing a far dirtier game than she'd anticipated. Then came worse news. An inspector burst in, voice trembling, "Private James Carter, ma'am, he's unconscious. Found in his tent with a slashed wrist. There's a suicide note." Sarah's fists clenched, knuckles widening. Carter, the brave private whose diary sparked this reckoning, a suicide? Nonsense, she snapped. This is a setup. She rushed to the tent, where medics were lifting Carter's pale, lifeless form onto a stretcher, blood seeping through a hastily wrapped bandage on his wrist. A crumpled note lay nearby, claiming despair. Sarah's mind raced. Someone wanted Carter silenced, staging it as self-harm to bury the case in a military prosecutor's dead-end file. "Get him to the nearest civilian hospital, not a military one," she ordered. "University Medical Center, now. I take full responsibility. Cordon off this Arano one touches anything." The medics hesitated, then obeyed under her steely gaze. As they loaded Carter into an ambulance, the direct line from the Secretary of Defense rang. The Secretary's voice was sharp, chastising her for unauthorized methods and ordering her to halt the inspection and return to Washington, D.C. "General Thompson, reports of procedural violations have reached me. Return immediately and explain yourself." Sarah's response was measured but firm. "Sir, we've uncovered evidence of treasonous activity undermining national security. If we stop now, it's all for nothing." The Secretary cut her off. "Even if true, your evidence may be inadmissible due to illegal methods." "That's an order, General." The line went dead. Sarah stood in the dim headquarters, surrounded by exhausted inspectors, the weight of a vast conspiracy closing in. Evidence destroyed, a key witness nearly killed, and now orders to stand down. It was a trap tightening around her. She gazed out at the dark Rockies beyond the window, the image of Carter's diary burning in her mind. There had to be another way. Flipping through its pages, her finger stopped on an early entry. "Sergeant Daniel Brooks was on duty today. He gave me this notebook, told me to record anything odd. Said, don't trust anyone, especially officers. Brooks saw something awful, tried to expose it, but they labeled him a psychopath and forced him out. This unit's rotten to the core. Daniel Brooks. A new name, a potential key to breaking this wall." "Colonel Grant," Sarah called, "pause the interrogations of Hayes and Wilson. Pull records of all personnel discharged from the 108th over the past 2 years. Find Daniel Brooks. Look for any complaints he filed or questionable dismissals." The order reignited the team's focus, a flicker of hope piercing the gloom. Hours later, after sifting through personnel files, Grant reported, "Found him, ma'am. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, discharged a year ago. Faced disciplinary action for allegedly assaulting a superior and insubordination, but the case was dropped for lack of evidence. He resigned, citing health issues, diagnosed with PTSD. Fellow soldiers say he tried to report corruption, got caught, and was hounded out by officers. The pieces fit. Brooks wasn't just a disgraced soldier, he was another whistleblower forced into silence. Get his current address and contact info, now," Sarah ordered. The search led to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Sarah made a bold call. She could no longer trust the Army's internal system. Entrusting Fort Carson to Grant, she slipped back into her hiking gear and drove through the night along I-95, heading for D.C. On the way, she dialed David Miller, a trusted friend of her late husband and investigations chief at the Washington Post. "David, ever hear of Eastern Defense Solutions?" she asked. Miller's voice perked up. "Yeah, they were tied to an Army corruption scandal years ago, but it fizzled. Insufficient evidence." "Why?" "I've got that evidence now," Sarah said. "And it's bigger and uglier than you can imagine. Want to hunt a monster with me?" Miller's breath quickened on the line. For a soldier like Sarah, airing the Army's dirty laundry to the press was career suicide, but with the enemy closing in, she had no choice. The truth needed to reach the world before it was buried. At a grimy motel in D.C.'s suburbs, Sarah climbed a rickety staircase to room 308, where a dim light glowed under the door. She knocked. A wary voice answered, "Who's there?" "Sarah Thompson, from the 108th Brigade, Fort Carson." Silence, then the creak of an old door. Daniel Brooks appeared gaunt, eyes hollow, a shadow of the soldier he'd been. He eyed her civilian clothes suspiciously. "What do you want?" "I'm done with the army. Can I come in?" Sarah asked. Reluctantly, he let her into the cramped room, barely larger than a closet. Sitting on a creaky chair, she faced his guarded stare. "Why should I trust you? A general in a dump like this? Sounds like a trap." Sarah leaned forward, voice steady, and recounted the horrors at Fort Carson: moldy rations, shattered helmets, Carter's near-fatal suicide. At Carter's name, Brooks' face twitched, the first crack in his stoic mask. "James Carter," he murmured. "That kid. I gave him the notebook." Sarah nodded. "His courage started this, but they're fighting back. I need your help, Daniel." Brooks lowered his head, shoulders trembling as old wounds reopened. "It's pointless. They're untouchable. I tried filed reports, sent anonymous tips to reporters. They branded me a nutcase, ruined my life." Sarah stood, her gaze unwavering. "You were alone then. You're not now. I'm Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson, and I swear on my uniform, we'll take these bastards down. Don't let Carter's blood be for nothing. Give me your blade." Brooks met her eyes, seeing not the greed of corrupt officers but the resolve of a soldier fighting for justice. After a long pause, he rose, opened a dusty drawer, and pulled out a flash drive. Photos of Hayes taking cash from Peterson. Videos of faked equipment tests. Phone recordings. "I meant to blow it all up, but I got scared." Sarah took the drive, its weight heavy with the lives it represented. "You didn't fail, Daniel. You survived to deliver this." That night, in the Washington Post's bustling D.C. office, David Miller reviewed the flash drive's contents with Sarah's evidence, his jaw dropping. This wasn't just corruption, it was a scandal threatening national security. He alerted the editor-in-chief, securing full backing. Brooks, summoned to the office, poured out his story, his recorded testimony forming the spine of a bombshell article. 2 days later, on a crisp autumn morning in 2025, the Washington Post hit newsstands with a searing headline, "Tears of the Rockies, a General's Rebellion Against a Rotten Uniform." Photos of moldy food, a shattered helmet, and Hayes with Peterson exchanging cash exposed the 108th's decay, implicating high-ranking Pentagon officials. The story exploded, crashing the Pentagon's website, fueling public outrage, and sparking a petition for Army reform that gained millions of signatures in hours. The tide had turned, and Sarah Thompson's fight was just beginning. The morning sun broke over Washington, D.C., in the autumn of 2025, but the air inside the Washington Post's newsroom crackled with the intensity of a battlefield. Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson's evidence, combined with Sergeant Daniel Brooks' damning flash drive, had fueled a front-page exposé titled, "Tears of the Rockies, a General's Rebellion Against a Rotten Uniform." The article, splashed with photos of moldy rations, a shattered helmet, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes exchanging cash with Eastern Defense Solutions Director, Richard Peterson, sent shockwaves across the nation. The Pentagon's website crashed under a flood of outraged visitors, and a petition for sweeping Army reforms racked up millions of signatures within hours. Social media erupted, with hashtags demanding justice for the soldiers of the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade at Fort Carson, Colorado. Politicians, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Opposition leaders called for an emergency session of the House Armed Services Committee, vowing a full investigation. The Department of Defense, cornered by public fury, issued a rare public apology from the Secretary, promising a joint task force to probe the scandal without regard to rank. Sarah Thompson, once accused of breaching protocol with her unauthorized inspection, emerged overnight as a national hero, a soldier who dared to challenge a corrupt system to protect her troops. The order for her recall to D.C. was rescinded, and she was named special advisor to the Joint Investigation Team, granted sweeping authority to pursue the truth. Back at Fort Carson, the inspection she had launched was in full swing, her team moving with surgical precision. Evidence mounted, forged contracts, hidden bank accounts, and communications linking Hayes and Master Sergeant Paul Wilson to Eastern Defense Solutions. The net tightened around Richard Peterson, whose office in Denver faced raids by federal agents. Seized documents revealed a web of kickbacks and falsified quality reports stretching back years. But the real bombshell was the name that surfaced during Peterson's interrogation: Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan, head of the Pentagon's Armaments Directorate, the man who had buried a similar case 3 years earlier. Sullivan, a decorated officer with decades of service, was summoned by the military prosecutor's office, a humiliating fall for a man of his stature. He denied everything, his voice steady in initial questioning, but Brooks' flash drive held a trap he couldn't escape. Recordings of his calls with Peterson, discussing cover-ups and payouts, left no room for denial. Sullivan's arrest on charges of bribery and abuse of authority marked an unprecedented moment in modern Army history, a sitting general taken down in disgrace. The investigation didn't stop there. Michael Hayes, stripped of his rank, faced a court-martial and was sentenced to 15 years in a military prison for theft, fraud, and endangering soldiers' lives. Paul Wilson, his accomplice, received 10 years, his career in ruins. Peterson, Eastern Defense Solutions Director, was hit with a 12-year sentence and a multi-million-dollar fine, his company dismantled under federal scrutiny. Over 40 officers, Pentagon officials, and contractor employees were indicted, their trials exposing a culture of greed that had festered unchecked. Sarah's gamble-defying orders, going to the press, and trusting Brooks' evidence had paid off, but the cost was steep. She had made powerful enemies, and whispers of retaliation lingered in Pentagon corridors. Yet the public's response was a shield, her image as the Iron Lady, who broke the glass ceiling and fought for the common soldier, made her untouchable for now. The scandal sparked systemic change. The Whistleblower Protection Act, dubbed the Brooks Law in honor of Daniel's courage, was strengthened, creating an independent oversight body to monitor military contracts and ensure supply quality. Food and equipment standards for troops saw immediate improvements, with bases nationwide undergoing audits. A year later, in the spring of 2026, Sarah returned to Fort Carson. The 108th Brigade was being phased out, its role diminished by years of neglect, but the soldiers she met were different. Their faces carried hope, not despair. The mess hall, once a source of shame, now served fresh bread and steaming soup, the air free of decay. She found Private James Carter, fully recovered from his staged suicide attempt, standing tall in civilian clothes. He saluted her with a bright smile, honorably discharged and ready to rebuild his life. A package arrived from Daniel Brooks, now an advocate at a Veterans Rights Center, containing a book he'd written about his ordeal, a testament to the fight they'd shared. Sarah climbed a hill overlooking the base, the Rocky Mountains stretching before her. The landscape was serene, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past year. She thought of Carter's diary, Brooks' flash drive, and the soldiers who'd suffered under corrupt leaders. Their courage, and her refusal to turn away, had uprooted a rotten system. Problems remained. Corruption was a hydra, and new heads would grow, but for now, healthy roots were taking hold. The cold tears of the Rockies had become a warm spring rain, nourishing a new army. Sarah stood tall, her 3 stars gleaming, knowing the fight for justice was far from over, but the hope she saw below was worth every battle. In the aftermath of the explosive Washington Post exposé in autumn 2025, Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson stood at the epicenter of a transformed military landscape, her unauthorized investigation of the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade at Fort Carson, Colorado, now a national reckoning. The article, headlined "Tears of the Rockies, a General's Rebellion Against a Rotten Uniform," had ignited a firestorm, with images of moldy rations, a shattered helmet, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes exchanging cash with Eastern Defense Solutions Director, Richard Peterson, searing into the public's consciousness. The Pentagon's website buckled under a deluge of traffic, and a petition demanding accountability and Army reform amassed millions of signatures in mere hours. Social media buzzed with fury, hashtags like Justice for the 108th trending nationwide, while opposition lawmakers in Congress called for an emergency session of the House Armed Services Committee, vowing a thorough investigation. The Department of Defense, caught in the public's crosshairs, issued a rare apology from the Secretary, who pledged a joint task force to probe the scandal, unbound by rank or influence. Sarah, once branded a rogue for her covert inspection, was now hailed as a heroic soldier who risked everything to protect her troops. The order for her return to Washington, D.C., was rescinded, and she was appointed special advisor to the Joint Investigation Team, wielding unprecedented authority to pursue justice. At Fort Carson, her team operated like a surgical strike force, unearthing a trove of evidence, forged contracts, hidden bank accounts, and communications tying Hayes and Master Sergeant Paul Wilson to Eastern Defense Solutions. Federal raids on the company's Denver offices exposed a labyrinth of kickbacks and falsified quality reports spanning years. The investigation's biggest coup came during Richard Peterson's interrogation, when he named Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan, head of the Pentagon's Armaments Directorate, as the mastermind who had quashed a similar case 3 years prior. Sullivan, a towering figure with decades of service, faced the military prosecutor's office in a humiliating spectacle. He denied all charges, his composure unshaken at first, but Sergeant Daniel Brooks' flash drive handed to Sarah in a rundown D.C. motel proved his undoing. Recordings of Sullivan's calls with Peterson, plotting cover-ups and payouts, sealed his fate. His arrest for bribery and abuse of authority marked a historic low for the Army, a sitting general brought down in disgrace. The fallout was swift and severe. Michael Hayes, stripped of his rank, was court-martialed and sentenced to 15 years in a military prison for theft, fraud, and endangering soldiers' lives. Paul Wilson, his co-conspirator, received 10 years, his career obliterated. Richard Peterson faced 12 years behind bars and a multi-million-dollar fine, his company gutted by federal scrutiny. Over 40 officers, Pentagon officials, and contractor employees were indicted, their trials laying bare a culture of greed that had festered unchecked. Sarah's decision to bypass the Army's compromised system and take the evidence to David Miller at the Washington Post had been a gamble that paid off, but it came at a cost. She had made powerful enemies, and whispers of retaliation echoed in Pentagon halls. Yet public support shielded her, the Iron Lady, who shattered the glass ceiling and fought for the common soldier became untouchable, at least for now. The scandal catalyzed sweeping reforms. The Whistleblower Protection Act, renamed the Brooks Law in honor of Daniel's courage, was fortified, establishing an independent oversight body to monitor military contracts and ensure supply quality. Bases across the country underwent rigorous audits, and food and equipment standards for soldiers saw marked improvements. By spring 2026, Sarah returned to Fort Carson, where the 108th Brigade was being phased out, its role diminished by years of neglect. The soldiers she met were transformed, no longer haunted by despair, their eyes held life and purpose. The mess hall, once a symbol of decay, now served fresh bread and steaming soup, the air clean and warm. Private James Carter, who had survived his staged suicide attempt, greeted her in civilian clothes, his salute bright with gratitude. Honorably discharged, he was rebuilding his life, his courage the spark that had ignited this change. A package arrived from Daniel Brooks, now an advocate at a Veterans Rights Center in D.C., containing a book chronicling his ordeal, a testament to their shared fight. Sarah climbed a hill overlooking the base, the Rockies stretching endlessly before her. The serene landscape belied the chaos of the past year. She thought of Carter's diary, Brooks' flash drive, and the countless soldiers who had suffered under corrupt leaders. Their bravery, and her refusal to look away, had uprooted a diseased system. Challenges remained. Corruption was a persistent enemy, but new, healthy roots were taking hold. The cold tears of the Rockies had turned to warm spring rain, nourishing a reborn army. Sarah stood tall, her 3 stars glinting in the sunlight, knowing the fight for justice was far from over but fueled by the hope she saw below. The battle had been hers, Carter's, and Brooks, but the victory belonged to every soldier who would now serve with dignity. The night at Fort Carson, Colorado, was a crucible of tension as Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson stood in the commandeered brigade commander's office, now a hub for her relentless inspection of the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade. The evidence against Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes and Master Sergeant Paul Wilson was overwhelming: forged contracts, illicit cash flows, and communications linking them to Eastern Defense Solutions, a corrupt supplier bleeding the unit dry. Sarah's team uploaded their findings to a secure Pentagon server, but the fight was far from over. A chilling call from Colonel Stephen Grant interrupted her. "General, the Pentagon's internal network is down. All our data on the 108th everything since last night is corrupted. No access." Sarah's heart sank. This was no accident, it was sabotage orchestrated by the shadowy forces Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan had warned her about, with connections stretching to the Pentagon's core. "Stay calm, Colonel," she said, her voice steady despite the fire inside. "We have the originals, documents, recordings, physical evidence. They can't erase the truth." But the blow was severe, signaling an enemy with terrifying reach. Then, a worse report came. Private James Carter, the whistleblower whose diary sparked this crusade, was found unconscious in a guarded tent, his wrist slashed, a supposed suicide note nearby. Sarah's fists clenched, her knuckles white. "This is a setup," she growled, rushing to the scene. Medics carried Carter's pale form on a stretcher, blood seeping through a crude bandage. The note claimed despair, but Sarah saw murder dressed as suicide, a ploy to silence him and bury the case. "Take him to University Medical Center, not a military hospital," she ordered. "I take full responsibility. Seal this tent, no one touches anything." The medics, cowed by her iron gaze, complied. As Carter's ambulance sped off, the Secretary of Defense's direct line rang, his voice sharp with reprimand. "General Thompson, your unauthorized methods have caused chaos. Cease the inspection and return to D.C. immediately." Sarah pushed back. "Sir, we're uncovering treason that threatens national security. Stopping now buries it all." He was unmoved. "Your evidence may be inadmissible due to illegal collection." "That's an order." The line went dead, leaving Sarah surrounded by a tightening noose: destroyed data, a nearly dead witness, and orders to stand down. The conspiracy loomed like a fog, but she refused to yield. In the dim headquarters, she reopened Carter's diary, her eyes catching an entry. "Sergeant Daniel Brooks gave me this notebook. Told me to log anything strange. Said, don't trust officers. He saw something terrible, tried to expose it, but they called him crazy and forced him out. This unit's rotten. Daniel Brooks, a name, a lifeline." "Colonel Grant," Sarah snapped, "halt interrogations of Hayes and Wilson. Pull records of all 108th personnel discharged in the last 2 years. Find Daniel Brooks, focus on any complaints or suspicious dismissals." The order sparked renewed energy in her exhausted team. Hours later, Grant returned. "Sergeant Daniel Brooks, discharged a year ago. Accused of assaulting a superior and insubordination, but the case collapsed for lack of evidence. He resigned, citing PTSD. Comrades say he reported corruption, was caught, and hounded out." Sarah's pulse quickened. Brooks was another silenced whistleblower. Find his current address, now. The trail led to a dilapidated motel on DC's outskirts. Sarah, no longer trusting the Army's compromised system, entrusted Fort Carson to Grant, donned her hiking gear, and drove through the night along I-95. En route, she called David Miller, investigations chief at the Washington Post and a trusted friend of her late husband. "David, know anything about Eastern Defense Solutions?" she asked. "Yeah," Miller replied, "they were linked to an Army scandal years ago, but it died insufficient evidence." "What's up?" "I've got that evidence," Sarah said. "It's uglier than you can imagine." Ready to hunt a monster. Miller's silence spoke volumes. This was a career-defining risk. For Sarah, going to the press was akin to putting a gun to her own career, but with the enemy closing in, the truth needed a megaphone. At the motel, Sarah climbed a creaky staircase to room 308, where a faint light glowed. She knocked. A wary voice answered, "Who's there?" "Sarah Thompson, from the 108th, Fort Carson." Silence, then a rusty door creaked open, revealing Daniel Brooks Gaunt, eyes shadowed by betrayal. He eyed her civilian clothes with suspicion. "What do you want?" "I'm done with the army." "May I come in?" Sarah asked. He relented, letting her into a room barely bigger than a closet. Sitting on a rickety chair, she faced his guarded stare. "Why trust you? A general in this dump? Smells like a trap." Sarah leaned forward, recounting Fort Carson's horrors: moldy food, fake helmets, Carter's near murder. At Carter's name, Brooks flinched. "James Carter," he muttered. "I gave him that notebook." Sarah nodded. "His courage started this, but they're hitting back. I need you, Daniel." Brooks' shoulders shook, old wounds reopening. "It's useless. They're untouchable. I tried reports, anonymous tips to journalists. They labeled me a psychopath, ruined me." Sarah stood, her eyes fierce. "You were alone then." "Not now. I'm Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson, and I swear on my uniform, we'll bring them down. Don't let Carter's blood be wasted. Give me your weapon." Brooks met her gaze, seeing not corruption but a soldier's resolve. After a long pause, he pulled a flash drive from a hidden drawer. Photos of Hayes taking money from Peterson. Videos of faked equipment tests. Phone recordings. "I planned to blow it all up, but I chickened out." Sarah took the drive, its weight heavy with broken lives. "You didn't fail. You survived to deliver this." That night, the Washington Post's D.C. office became a war room. David Miller, stunned by the flash drive's contents and Sarah's evidence, saw a scandal that shook national security. He secured the editor-in-chief's support, and Brooks, summoned to the office, gave an hours-long testimony, his words forming the backbone of a bombshell article. 2 days later, in autumn 2025, the Washington Post hit stands with "Tears of the Rockies," exposing the 108th's rot with vivid photos and ironclad proof. The nation reeled, the Pentagon site crashed, and public fury demanded justice, setting the stage for a final reckoning. The autumn of 2025 had transformed into a crucible of justice, as Lieutenant General Sarah Thompson's audacious investigation into the 108th Motorized Infantry Brigade at Fort Carson, Colorado, culminated in a seismic exposé published by the Washington Post. Titled "Tears of the Rockies, A General's Rebellion Against a Rotten Uniform," the article laid bare the rot within the brigade, with damning images of moldy rations, a shattered counterfeit helmet, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes exchanging cash with Richard Peterson, director of Eastern Defense Solutions. The story detonated across America, crashing the Pentagon's website under a flood of outraged traffic and fueling a petition for Army reform that amassed millions of signatures in hours. Social media erupted with hashtags like "Justice for the 108th," and opposition leaders in Congress demanded an emergency session of the House Armed Services Committee, vowing a no-holds-barred investigation. The Department of Defense, reeling from public pressure, issued a public apology from the Secretary, who announced a joint task force to probe the scandal, unbound by rank or influence. Sarah Thompson, once vilified for her unauthorized inspection, emerged as a national symbol of courageous soldier who defied protocol to protect her troops. The order to recall her to Washington, D.C., was scrapped, and she was appointed special advisor to the Joint Investigation Team, granted sweeping powers to pursue the truth. At Fort Carson, her inspection team operated with relentless precision, uncovering a mountain of evidence, forged contracts, hidden bank accounts, and communications tying Hayes and Master Sergeant Paul Wilson to Eastern Defense Solutions' corrupt schemes. Federal raids on the company's Denver offices exposed years of kickbacks and falsified quality reports, but the true breakthrough came during Peterson's interrogation, when he named Lieutenant General Robert Sullivan, head of the Pentagon's Armaments Directorate, as the architect of the cover-up, having buried a similar case 3 years earlier. Sullivan, a decorated general, faced the military prosecutor's office in a humiliating fall from grace. He denied all charges, his demeanor unshaken at first, but the flash drive from Sergeant Daniel Brooks delivered to Sarah in a dingy D.C. motel proved his downfall. Recordings of Sullivan's calls with Peterson, plotting to suppress evidence and secure payouts, left no escape. His arrest for bribery, abuse of authority, and treason marked a historic disgrace for the Army. The trials that followed were swift and merciless. Michael Hayes, stripped of his rank, was court-martialed and sentenced to 15 years in a military prison for theft, fraud, and endangering soldiers' lives. Paul Wilson, his accomplice, received 10 years, his career obliterated. Richard Peterson faced 12 years behind bars and a multi-million-dollar fine, his company dismantled under federal scrutiny. Over 40 officers, Pentagon officials, and contractor employees were indicted, their trials exposing a culture of greed that had festered for years. Sarah's gamble bypassing the Army's tainted system and taking the evidence to David Miller at the Washington Post had turned the tide, but it came at a steep cost. She had made enemies in the Pentagon's highest echelons, and whispers of retaliation lingered. Yet the public's adoration shielded her. The Iron Lady, who shattered the glass ceiling and fought for the common soldier, became a folk hero, untouchable for now. The scandal spurred transformative reforms. The Whistleblower Protection Act, renamed the Brooks Law in honor of Daniel's bravery, was strengthened, establishing an independent oversight body to monitor military contracts and ensure supply quality. Bases nationwide faced rigorous audits, and food and equipment standards for soldiers improved dramatically. By spring 2026, Sarah returned to Fort Carson, where the 108th Brigade was being phased out, its role diminished by neglect and corruption. The soldiers she met were no longer shadows of despair, their faces glowed with purpose. The mess hall, once a cesspool of mold and decay, now served fresh bread and steaming soup, the air warm with renewal. Private James Carter, who had survived a staged suicide attempt meant to silence him, greeted her in civilian clothes, his salute radiant with gratitude. Honorably discharged, he was rebuilding his life, his diary the spark that ignited this upheaval. A package arrived from Daniel Brooks, now a veterans' rights advocate in D.C., containing a book he'd written about his ordeal, a testament to their shared struggle. Sarah climbed a hill overlooking the base, the Rockies stretching vast and serene before her. She thought of Carter's courage, Brooks' resilience, and the countless soldiers who had suffered under corrupt leaders. Their bravery, and her refusal to turn away, had uprooted a diseased system. Corruption remained a persistent foe, but new, healthy roots were taking hold. The cold tears of the Rockies had become a warm spring rain, nourishing a reborn army. Sarah stood tall, her 3 stars gleaming, knowing the fight for justice was far from over, but the hope she saw below was worth every battle. The victory belonged not just to her, Carter, or Brooks, but to every soldier who would now serve with dignity, their lives no longer betrayed by greed.